This started when I was invited to my cousin's house one summer day to hang out. I'll call her Kate. We had known each other most of our lives, and was one of the few family members outside of my immediate family I still talk to. Family fighting with other family members about money will usually tear people apart. When I arrived, she was there with her then boyfriend, whom I'll refer to as Andy. I didn't like him very much. He was what's called a one-upper. You did that? I did that blindfolded. You caught a fish that big? I caught a fish this big. He was really cocky about everything too, and just overall oozed douchebag frat boy energy, along with having the kind of laugh that just caused you to want to cut out his vocal cords. I couldn't stand the guy. And neither could most of mine and Kate's close friends. Well, anyways, I'm getting off topic. We spent the day running around the town doing various things until we ended up back at Kate's house for some beers, which we had bought before heading back. This was back when I still drank a little bit. After some time had passed, we got on the topic of my grandmother. It was here that I learned Kate and my grandmother had some issues that were never resolved before she passed away. I don't recall what they were, but Kate mentioned that she never got to reconcile with her and that she didn't even know where she was buried. Kate wasn't even allowed to go to the funeral due to the family problems I mentioned before. I know where she's buried. My mom and dad used to visit her grave at least once in a while. Haven't been there in years now, though. Her grave is in the cemetery by Thorn Street Park, I said. Can we go there tonight? Asked Kate in a slightly excited and hopeful tone. After the alcohol has left her system, of course. Kate was lenient with most things, but driving while having any alcohol in you whatsoever was something she absolutely would not budge on. I had no problem with that, because I was the same way. I was planning on stopping about 3 hours before I went home, leaving plenty of time for the alcohol to leave me before heading home. On top of that, I was nursing 2 cans of beer for like an hour and a half, so I wasn't anywhere near being drunk. Plus, being a guy that's over 6 foot and in decent shape, I wouldn't have to wait too long before I was ready to drive. It was maybe a little bit before midnight when we left Kate's house. Andy came along too, unfortunately. We brought flashlights with us so we could read the names on the tombstones, and we also made it a point to have someone watching the roads around the cemetery for car lights. The almost full moon was out enough for us to be able to walk around without having to worry about bumping into something and twisting an ankle. Plus, there were some trees there that blocked out the moonlight over some of the graves. I parked the truck across the street from the cemetery, thanking God that the gate hadn't been closed. It normally would be after a certain time. But apparently it was our lucky night, and whosoever was supposed to do that didn't. We got out, and I led the way to the northeast side, which thankfully was closest to where I parked. After about 20 minutes of looking and crouching behind the headstones where cars had passed by just to be on the safe side, I found the grave. I don't remember anything about what Kate said, but she made peace with my grandmother. While this was going on, I kept looking around me and off deeper into the cemetery. I got this feeling that someone was there with us. Not the feeling of being watched, but that a fourth person was there with us. You know when you're on your computer facing away from the door to the room and you feel someone walk in? It felt like that. Several more minutes passed by, and then we decided to leave, but not before trying to locate the oldest tombstone in that section. I have no idea who won, but we made it back to the truck without issue. I pulled out of the parking lot and decided to go the long way around the cemetery before dropping off Kate and Andy and heading home. I got to the red light and made a right-hand turn which went between a preschool and the opposite side of the cemetery we had been on. After turning onto the street, I saw a figure standing under one of the far street lights that were on the right side of the road. The cemetery side. They were just standing there. I could tell they were just standing there because they didn't bob up and down like someone does when they walk. They were also facing the road with their arms at their sides. As I drove closer, I noticed that the person was wearing clothing that you would associate with an elderly person. I began to think that maybe someone had wandered away from an old folks' home, or maybe they could be a dementia patient that wandered off in the middle of the night. You guys seeing this? I asked, pointing to the person in the road with my hand still on the wheel. I looked over at Kate's face, and I knew she saw what I saw because her mouth was halfway open and her eyes wide, full of tears. I looked back at the figure, and for a split second, it looked almost exactly like my grandmother. The short white hair and the style that she always had was unmistakable. The clothes she had on were the same kind that she wore whenever I saw her. I didn't get a really good look at her face, but she at least looked somewhat similar to what she did in life. My hands, arms, even my chest suddenly began to shake uncontrollably as we passed by the figure. I didn't slow down. I don't think I even looked back in the rearview mirror. Kate was freaking out just as much as I was, while Andy was in the back looking for what had gotten into us. I just drove up to the closest parking lot, which was a few streets over across from a bar and a barber shop. I needed to stop the truck before I got into an accident, but I also wanted to put some distance between me and that place before I did. Andy claims he didn't see anything, but me and Kate both saw it, so we know it wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the light. I don't recall much about what was said while we sat there, but I remember the shaking and just looking forward. We must have sat there for at least 10 minutes while I tried to regain my composure. Once the shaking had subsided for the most part, I drove Kate and Andy back to their house, none of us saying much. I very rarely drive past that cemetery anymore, and I haven't been back to my grandmother's grave since that night. Who knows? I may go back one day and see what happens this time around. I do know one thing, though. In the meantime, if I ever find myself heading towards the cemetery at night again, I'll probably take the long way home. June 3rd, 1990. I was very young at the time, barely being able to pronounce most words. My father was a plumber and did not gain much money at the time. He was also a single father, as my mother disappeared only a few months after I was born. My father would tell me stories of this one house across the street. It was a mansion with white walls and a black roof, and windows that always reflected the curious look of people who walked by. It almost seemed from another period of time, like those huge castles in fantasy movies. My father told me the people in that house were strange folk, almost never coming out of their bedrooms unless it was to inform my father of the broken pipe in their bathroom. My father always went there, however, as they would pay him a decent amount of money, about $50-$100 every time he went there, as opposed to his usual pay, which consisted of $10. He was very creeped out by it, though, not just because of the general appearance of the mansion, but because he heard rats through the walls, there was a room of unsettling sculptures, etc. April 2nd, 1995. The years went by. I was 8 years old. My father had gotten through a hard time, and so did I. My grandmother died, and my father was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he was wasting all of his money on alcohol to enjoy his life while it lasted. I rarely ate food due to the fact we were extremely short on money. The only times I did eat was a mere moldy piece of bread. I decided to start delivering packages to people, a small business which I was accepted into due to my hard situation. I gained a decent amount of money and was pretty happy, until one day. I had to deliver a package to the mansion across the street, also known as Hazelwood Manor. As I knock on the door, I realized no one was home. Me, being a little kid, naturally got curious, left the package at the front door, and broke into the house. It was extremely dark, with only a few candles lighting the room I was in. I could hear noises through the walls, and every room seemed like part of a huge maze. As I continued to walk through the manor, I noticed a room that was pitch black and emitted a horrible stench. I grabbed a candle from the living room and lit up the room, only to find piles of meat, which was rotten and a dried up blood covering it. I got out of the room as fast as possible, already having a panic attack. As I ran to the front door, I heard it open. It was a woman with pale skin and a white dress who I assumed was the housekeeper. I hid under a bed, which also emitted a rotten stench. As the woman walked into the kitchen, I saw something truly horrible, which left me paralyzed. It was a creature, not even remotely human, and was completely white. It dragged itself across the floor with arms so long they appeared to be tentacles, and legs which may have been even longer. It appeared to walk around the house on all fours, as it was too tall when standing normally. It had one eye, and that was its only facial feature. When it left, I ran as fast as I could, as I could hear a loud scream from behind and the creature chasing me at full speed. I looked back once I exited the manor, and when I realized there was silence, and the creature looked at me through a window until I left. I was trembling. My legs could barely move. I was covered in sweat, and I was about to start tearing up. I went ahead and tried to tell the police about what I saw, but they just seemed to not care. January 19th, 1999. One day I came home after I finished my shift, only to find several bottles of alcohol, blood, and the TV smashed. I panicked as I realized my father had gone missing. I began tearing up as I contacted the police to help me find him. After carefully looking at low-quality footage from a CCTV camera, we saw that he ran full speed towards the Hazelwood Manor, so we immediately headed towards there. As they started exploring and taking the housekeeper outside, I quickly realized most of them had probably gotten lost due to the fact that the mansion was pitch black and seemed like an endless maze. I entered the mansion, only to get lost as well. However, just as I was finding a room with many lights, I saw by far the most traumatizing thing of my life. A huge, snake-like creature dragged the mutilated and dismembered corpses of 5 officers. I looked at it with terror as the creature turned to face me. I ran as fast as I could as the snake chased me while slithering through the roof with the bloody corpses of the officers. In repeated occasions, it tried to attack me with the bodies, making them kick me and try to knock me down. I managed to find a room which I immediately locked and gave a huge sigh of relief as the snake stopped giving chase. However, this relief would not last for long, as I realized I was in the room of sculptures. It looked like any other room with basic furniture, except there were poorly made statues, with most of them having severe damage. I blinked for half a second when I realized they turned to face me. As I blinked the second time, they seemed to move, even by a little. However, I did not realize this, as their movements were subtle and they always maintained the same position. However, they were in a different place. By the time I figured it out, they were basically in front of me, so I exited the room very carefully, making sure not to blink. However, when I did, they began giving chase, no longer affected by whether I blinked or not. I ran as fast as I could, being already exhausted from running from the snake, so I grabbed a rusty hammer from the ground and with all the courage in me started smashing them, as they were made from porcelain. They eventually overwhelmed me, but a police officer managed to stop them. He was bleeding profusely and could barely walk, but he helped me get out of the building. We didn't spot any more creatures along the way, but we were both heavily traumatized by the horrors inside. It's the weirdest thing. And I mean, it's gotten to the point it affects his everyday functioning. It's stopped being quirky and become like a debilitating mental health issue, you know? My friend Tim lets it drop in conversation one day that he thinks he's got a stalker. And of course, I'm like, what? Stalker? And he's like, yeah, there's this figure I keep seeing, like kind of far away and like out of the corner of my eye usually. Followed me here. He's deaf, by the way, so he's signing this to me. That's why I typed it out as figure. In sign language, you don't really have pronouns. He uses the sign that means someone or something and uses 2 fingers to indicate the someone's eyes staring and staring at him from a distance. We're in a coffee shop. I ask him to point out the figure. He goes outside and looks around and points to the intersection a block down. It being the city during the morning rush, there are people walking around all over. And I'm like, the lady in the red hat, the dude in the Packers jacket. He keeps shaking his head, no, but he's got his eye on something or someone. He tells me forget it and we go back inside. And he doesn't mention it again. And when I ask at the end of our meetup if I should be concerned, he waves me off and says, all casual, no, it's good. Like he's embarrassed he brought it up. But then a few days later, he vid calls me asking to meet up again, like right now. Can I meet him for dinner? And I've already got plans, but he looks so strung out, so I say sure. We meet at a small diner. He's barely sat down at the table across from me when he says, signing very low so no one can see, even though chances of the babbling people around us knowing sign language are pretty darn low. Look, see the woman outside the window. I look, searching the street outside. There's only the ordinary pedestrian traffic of the late afternoon. I look back at Tim and shrug. His eyes dart to the window and he describes the woman he sees. Brunette, 30s or 40s, gray sweatshirt and pants. Oh, I look again. Well, there's a woman, curly brown hair with her kid. No. He shakes his head, sighs, and runs his fingers through his hair, and then turns and stares. Keep staring. I lean over to follow his gaze to the window. There's no one there. Hey, I sign. Are you sure you're feeling okay? I've been seeing her every day for 2 weeks, he interrupts, signing quickly now. She started far away, but each day she's gotten closer. He moves his hands closer and closer together and adds, I'm worried what happens when his hands touch. Who is she? Have you tried approaching her? Is she like someone you know? All I can think is it must be a relative. Like maybe he's hallucinating someone important to him. Tim has a history of depression, has struggled with some form of mental illness throughout most of his life, and spent most of his youth navigating stuff alone or holding it in because his family is hearing and never bothered to learn sign language. It strikes me to wonder if the woman has ever signed to him, but when I asked if she's hearing or deaf, he shakes his head. I don't know, and tells me he's never met her. Well, not really. But he knows who she is. I snort. It seems like he's being purposefully obscure. He claims he knows her, but has never met her. I ask him again who she is. He gets more agitated, rubbing his arms and looking over his shoulder. Oh, he says, she's moved. Where? I ask. Door. There is no one at the door. Clearly no one. But he keeps sneaking glances. Looks at me and smiles and gives me that 2-fingered motion again of eyes staring and staring, watching him. I ask him if he wants to leave. He says no. She'll just show up wherever he goes. I push my chair out and go to the door. He's watching me with a strange mixture of horror and fascination. I push open the door and step outside and come back in and sit back down with him. I reiterate to him that there's no one there. He rubs his palms in his eyes and finally says, okay. I ask him again how he knows her. This past summer, Tim tells me he and his friends went camping. One of them knew of a hiking trail with some scenic views, remote enough to be less traveled than the most famous peaks. There's a cabin along the trail, rustic but well built, a log cabin like in a picture on a postcard. The outhouse has a little window in the door and similar log construction. Everyone goes into the cabin, but Tim comes back out to use the outhouse. The stench is bad even from a distance. Tim holds his breath, wondering if he shouldn't just go in the woods instead. But he braves the reek and opens the door, and a cloud of flies bursts out, swirling around him in a storm of black wings. And at that moment, the stench hits him like a wave, making his eyes water and his stomach buck as he stumbles away from the outhouse and hurls. When he looks inside, there's a woman sitting on the toilet bench. She's kind of curled in the corner, gray sweatshirt, gray sweatpants, brown hair draping down around her. What little he can see of her face, her skin, is bloated and splotchy. He gets only a glimpse, And then he rushes to the cabin screaming, bursts in, hands flying, call police, now, now, woman dead, bathroom, call police, now, now, now. And his friends look up from poring over a backpack they found, with wallet and phone and uneaten moldy lunch, and it all so clearly belongs to the corpse in the outhouse. And it's definitely the same woman? I ask him. He nods. The police came and took away her body, he says. They found no evidence of foul play, and he and his friends were allowed to leave after questioning. He shows me her obituary. She was apparently cremated, and her funeral was a few weeks ago. But it is definitely her, he says. Okay, I think for a minute. Well, you had a really traumatic incident. I mean, that had to be traumatic, finding a dead body. So, maybe what you're seeing is because of, flashbacks from the trauma? You haven't asked me how she died. Oh, how did she die? He tells me she died of dehydration when after a few days, the heat and lack of water killed her. But she could have come out at any time. There was nothing stopping her. No lock on the door, no marks or signs of violence, no animal tracks outside, nothing. Why would she choose to stay and die? Why? He's obviously been torturing himself over this question. Strange, I agree. But I'm much more concerned for Tim's mental health. Tim's obsession with her. His trauma from finding her after her death has done a number on his already delicate mental state. Do you think your obsession with figuring out why she died might be fueling these visions? I ask him. I mean, regardless if you're seeing her because of trauma or because of some hallucination, it's not like you can change what happened. I think you should see a psychiatrist. See if you can get some meds to kill the hallucination. He chuckles humorlessly. Kill a hallucination who's already dead. But he agrees to see a psychiatrist. He seems to be feeling a little restored when we get up to leave. At the door, though, he pauses, his face twisting in anxiety. He waits, letting me go first to open it, and motions me to hold it wide for him. Only then does he step through. 3 days later, I get another message from Tim. He's stuck and begs me to come to his place. When I arrive, his door is ajar, but it feels rude to walk in, so I press the doorbell and watch the lights flash. My phone buzzes. Come on in. Tim greets me the moment I step inside, like he was right there waiting. He's got his bag in hand and tells me he's late, and he's going to be in so much trouble at work. Would I please come with him downstairs? He'll explain later. He ushers me down the staircase and at the front door of the building draws up sharp so that I almost bang into him, and he motions me to get the door even though it's partly open and he could easily just push it. I fling it wide and he dashes out signing, "Thank you, sorry, I'll explain after work." That evening, he asked me to let him back into his building, and after I let him in, the door's not even locked, the building front door is ajar. He leads me up to his unit and inspects the door. It's closed. His posture visibly relaxes as he unlocks it and invites me in for a beer. Then he admits to me sheepishly that he's had a rough few days, actually called in sick a couple times because now she is always at the door. Who? I ask, and then at his whitening look. Oh. But we just came through the door. Yeah, open doors are fine, closed doors are fine, but she... Didn't you notice the building door was ajar? He shows the partially open door with his hands, a slight gap between them, and then grips one hand and represents the door with the other. Her fingers were holding it open. I don't know how to say this. It seems a whole new level of delusional. Tim hands me a beer from the fridge, explaining that she is always at the door now, but he only sees her fingers and sometimes her eyes. So what happens if you open the door? I wonder. He takes a swig of his beer morosely, and then his gaze goes distant. He's focused on something behind me. I turn around. The bedroom door is ajar. I swing back to look at him. Is she there? The bedroom? You see fingers? His eyes meet mine. His face is flat. Deaf people are usually very expressive. Half the grammar is on the face, not the hands, but lately, he's been almost a robot. And then finally, he makes that gesture. 2 fingers, pointing at himself, staring and staring. And then he signs FML. I stand, go to the ajar door. Tim pales, eyes rounding, but says nothing. Just takes another sip of his beer and watches me. I push the door, reach up, run my hand down the length of the ajar edge, push it open further, swing it back and forth, look at him and raise my eyebrows like, see? It's nothing. Nothing's there. He grunts and his eyelids flutter. I don't think he's been sleeping enough. Hey, do you need someone to stay with you? Nah, he waves me off. Go home. So I do. But here's why I'm writing the post. He hasn't gotten better. He keeps asking me to help him when he gets stuck. Once it was at his workplace, other times at his apartment. Last time I was there, I noticed he took off all the doors except the front door to his unit. It's gotten to be utterly debilitating to his life, and the last time I saw him, he kept ranting at me about her, about how it didn't save her, and I didn't understand what he meant. Obviously, no one saved her. She was dead when he found her. No, he burst at me. You don't understand everything she suffered through, and it didn't save her. I can tell he's falling into depression. I'm worried he's gonna quit his job and just stop leaving his apartment and never come out. How do I help my friend? Update. I never actually posted what I wrote above because I felt like maybe I shouldn't bear Tim's troubles to the world, like it's not my story. But I'm sharing it now because he called me this afternoon furious. He followed my advice, and the psychiatrist told him to put the doors back on, and if he saw the fingers again, to close his eyes and open the door. That it's a compulsion he needs to gain power over. So he followed the instructions, put all the doors back up in place. Now, he told me he's screwed. He got stuck in his closet. Look, I'll head over, and then we'll open the door together, all right? I'll hold your hand while you push. I might have said this a bit too sarcastically, but then while I was heading over, I remembered his last rant to me about her, about how everything she suffered didn't save her. Of course, at the time I thought, duh, you found her rotting. Obviously, she wasn't saved. But while I was busing to his place, it finally struck me what he really meant. See, the fact he found her body in the corner meant she never opened the door. She chose to die rather than going near that door. But it still got her. And maybe that means there's no way for Tim to escape either. As this revelation hits, a sudden icy panic grips me because I'm the one who told him to go see the doctor, and it was all in his head, and to just buck up and open the door. My heart hammers 1,000 beats a minute like a hummingbird. As I try to vid call him, it rings and rings. And finally, the agonizing bus ride ends, and I'm leaping off the bus and rushing into his building and taking the steps 2 at a time. I let myself into his place out of breath, fling open the closet door. Nothing but clothes on hangers, shoe boxes, plastic storage bins, and blankets. Retreat back out to the bedroom, bathroom, living room, stomp again, so hard and loud the downstairs neighbors are sure to complain. No response. Call his phone, call and call. Finally, see its light flashing from the closet floor behind the door. As I lean down to pick it up, when I straighten, I notice that the door, it is swung closed behind me and is now just barely ajar. And there, wrapped around the edges of the closet door, are Tim's fingers. At first, I think it's a prank. Ha, I sign sarcastically, even though he can't see me. And I reach for the door and stop. I'm not sure why I stop. Some instinct. I wait for him to open it. And it's been over an hour. I'm still waiting. I think I'm gonna need some help getting out. But then once I do, what do I do next? How do I make sure that oh gosh, Tim his hand is still curled around the door, and his index finger just uncurled and curled again, beckoning me closer. Please help me. What should I do? There was a wad of papers buried underneath the many odds and ends of this week's garage sale, almost like they were trying to hide. Amongst the clutter, I found a bundle of envelopes, neatly stacked with a tight rubber band around them. I brought it to the attention of the man whose garage I was rummaging through, only for him to not show any interest in what I was showing. "Do you mind if I buy these from you?" I asked, expecting a no. "It's just a bunch of junk. Feel free to take them." To my shock, he answered. I was a bit of a collector, though my main goal was always some sort of reimbursement. I would buy junk and sell it for well over its worth. It was a living that many weren't proud of. I suppose, in lack of another word, I scammed people. I took the envelopes home expecting nothing but a story between two lovers. However, I was shocked at what was written on the pages. I started with the first envelope dated June 1st. The paper inside was damaged and the ink was fading, but I will meticulously copy the scribble that inhabits the page. June 1st. We sat around the campfire late last night, jumping to the sound of every branch breaking off from the strong foundation of its tree. With every noise, we thought it was going to be Declan, though it was not. The wind sang through the night, a constant howl carrying the sounds of night, swallowing the joys of the day. I feared that we were going to be picked off one by those who inhabit this forest. There are stories of people entering the forest to never return. I often ask myself, why are we here? But I know the answer. We need answers. Where did these people go? Where do you think these stories of people disappearing come from? I asked the group. They're just stories. Nothing is out here for you to be scared over. A shadowy Nolan responded. I'm not scared. I'm interested in knowing the truth. June 2nd, I sought out for any supplies I could find this morning. I found small pieces of wood, perfect for fires, a few berry bushes, though my search was abruptly ended as I stumbled across an abandoned home. Why is there an abandoned home in the middle of the forest? What's going on? The home boarded up from head to toe. I was terrified to approach. Could this be the center of it all? Did people disappear to this place? Is Declan inside? I brought the discovery to the attention of our guide. So, Nolan, what's the story about the house? I asked. What house? Nolan responded. The huge house. The house up there on the ridge. You can't tell me you know nothing about it. You can't tell me you know nothing about it. Nolan was one of the best guides you can find. He's been on many excursions throughout his life, whether it be dense forests or barren plains. He's seen it all, including this expanse. Oddly enough, he seemed puzzled. You gotta be kidding me. There's no house. I've been in these parts several times. I'm not. I'll show you. Let's go in the morning. It was getting late, so our excursion would have to wait until morning. June 3rd. We woke up early this morning. I carefully backtracked to where the house stood, pushing back the small branches blocking our path. The house is right over here, I exclaimed, pushing away the branches in front of our path. Are you sure you didn't eat anything you weren't supposed to? Nolan joked. Shut up, I'm telling you, it's right over here. The branches gave way only to give way to more branches, to more trees. I honestly was confused. There was no house. I have no idea what's going on right now, but I know I saw a house. It was huge, a mansion. You could tell that in its prime it was a lovely home, a sturdy structure made of brick with glimmering white beam supports in the front. What happened to it? I spent the rest of my day gathering more supplies. I didn't want to be looked at, to be mocked by the rest. I know what I saw. June 6th. Declan finally returned, covered in dried blood. After days of fear that he was dead, he was back. But he seemed different. Declan was an adventurer, balls to the wall type of guy, like many of us. Though what made him different from the rest of us was that he was never one to back down from a challenge, often one set by himself. The first night, Declan concocted some elaborate plan of him catching a deer, killing it, then using it to provide for the rest of the group. "I got the deer," Declan quietly proclaimed. "What do you mean you got the deer?" I responded, confused. There was no deer in sight. Declan was covered in dried blood. "Yeah, I caught it. I killed it. Then it came." "It? What it?" "Declan, you gotta tell us." You could tell that Declan wasn't entirely there. Something was bothering him. With every mention of whatever it was, seemed to agitate him. "I don't know what it was. It had no eyes. It was dark. I couldn't really get a look at it until..." "Petrified? Until what?" I responded. "I don't know. Everything went so fast. I tried to run. Can we please stop? Can we please stop?" Something was bothering him. "I don't plan to sleep tonight." June 8th. After a few days, the group decided it was a good time to question Declan a bit more. Declan seemed to be returning to his normal self, though he'd occasionally seemed spooked, as if someone or something was watching him. Sure, we were watching him, but I think he thought something else was watching him. "Hey, Declan, can we get some answers?" I asked. "Do you remember anything else?" "Not really. There's something out there, though," he responded. What's out there? What's out there? That doesn't help us, Deck. Where'd it come from?" "A house." Enraged, Nolan jumped up and grabbed Declan by the shirt. "There is no house out there. I don't know what's going on with you two, but I've been here, and there's nothing." "There is one, though. A big one." "Like a mansion?" I asked. "Yeah." June 9th. We packed up camp and prepared to find this mysterious house. We walked for hours, not seeming to make any ground. We followed carefully behind Declan, only for us to stumble upon the remains of the campsite we left this morning. Puzzled, I asked, "How is this possible? We didn't deviate from Declan's path at all. No one had a response for me, and frankly, I wasn't expecting one. We were scared. It was getting late. We were tired from a long day's work, so we decided to set up camp in the exact place we left in the morning. June 10th. Overall, last night was bizarre. We have no idea what's going on. Some are speculating we're in a maze, where others believe we're going mad. I don't know what to think anymore. I'm still driven to find the elusive mansion that's crossed both Declan's and my path. "Why don't we set off towards the direction I saw the house today?" Trying to find some sort of drive, I proclaimed. "What's the point?" Declan responded. "Why don't you want to find it? I figured of all people, you'd be one gung-ho in finding it." "I'm scared." Declan was interrupted by a gust of wind carrying what sounded like screams, though they didn't sound human. There was a deep, low scream, echoed by a high-pitched scream coming the direction we ought to set off to. I began to second-guess myself because I didn't want to face the monstrosity Deck had. But deep down, I knew it was something we all had to do, together. We set off. June 11th. Throughout the night, the screams didn't stop, and we seemed to be getting closer. There were moments throughout the night where we spooked ourselves, stepping loudly on some leaves, breaking branches. The silence we did have was filled with the screams of the beings we were yet to face. We reached the clearing where I had taken the group a few days ago, but this time, to everyone's amazement, a dismal mansion lay in the clearing. Though it wasn't how I remembered it. The door that was once boarded up was open, almost as if it was inviting us to go inside. I didn't think I would find myself asking to turn back, but I did. I think we should go back. I don't think we belong here anymore. Let's just stick around for a bit with the house in sight and see what happens, Nolan proclaimed. We set up camp just inside the woods where the mansion was just visible. We could see the darkness of the door. Nothing was going to enter or leave without us knowing. We set up shifts by drawing sticks. Unfortunately, I drew the short stick, meaning I was first to watch. June 12th. I don't know what time it is, but I'm still on my watch. There's the howling wind, the snores of my counterparts, and the drum of my heart. I have no idea what to listen to anymore. My eyes are locked on the door, only glancing down every so often to write these words. I think we should enter the mansion. We need to find out what's inside, if anything at all. I fear that there may be remains of those lost to the woods, but I pray that there are none. My shift is about to end. I could feel my eyes getting heavy. Nudging Declan, "Hey, you're up. Your shift starts now." June 13th, the final envelope. Declan woke us all up abruptly last night. He claimed he saw something exit the house, but he was too petrified to move. He described the figure as dark, almost like a shadow, almost like it didn't exist. He said that it had no eyes, just as he did before, and that it reacted to an estray sound coming from the forest. After a long discussion, we decided as a group we should enter the house. Everyone's curiosity has gotten the better of them, including my own. Perhaps we've all gone mad. We're insane to even set foot in that house, but something is drawing us in. I don't know what to expect upon entering the mansion. Part of me is excited, yet the other half of me is anxious and terrified. We're getting ready to enter the mansion now. Declan approached me. "You ready?" Dec asked. "Yeah." That was it. That was the last envelope. I was driven. I needed to find out the rest of the story. What happened to the group? Did they succumb to the house as many others did before them? I returned to the origin of this story, the house where I found the envelopes. I spoke to the man who at first didn't seem to care, but as soon as I began to mention my findings in the story, his curiosity seemed to peak. "Do you know anything about the story?" I asked. Though it seemed the curiosity had peaked, he still didn't want to answer my questions. It was almost like he wanted to hear the rendition found in the envelopes in its entirety. So I recounted everything. But as I finished, I no longer felt welcome, so I decided to leave. I stood up, reaching out to shake the man's hand. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name," I stated. "You can call me Dec," the man responded with a devilish smirk. I need to share something that happened to me recently, and I'm completely lost. Well, I recently moved to the house where I am, a spacious place with a large backyard. I live in South America, and around here vegetation grows a lot and very fast, so I need to weed the yard weekly if I want to be able to step on the ground. The thing is, this new house has been unoccupied for quite some time, so you can imagine the scene. I called a friend to help me clear the land, and after 5 exhausting hours, we managed to make the place more welcoming. We were heading inside for a well-deserved lemonade when he tripped and fell. I approached to see how he was, and he turned, looking at what had caused his fall. It was a small, rounded piece of metal, I suppose aluminum, sticking out of the ground, with most of it buried. I began to dig to see what might be there. I've seen countless news stories of people finding relics, gold coins, and all sorts of things in their yards, making a decent amount of money. What I found, though, was a chromed tube. It had engraved writing in relief on the metal saying, "Photograph time capsule, only open if adding a photo." It may not be a valuable item, but it seemed interesting enough to make me keep it. We went inside, and while refreshing ourselves with juice, we started talking about the capsule. My friend, who I'll call Franco, is a photography enthusiast and has a Polaroid. those more aesthetic things. He suggested taking a photo to add to the capsule and bury it again somewhere else. It would be an unusual and different artistic project that he would like to participate in. I agreed, and while he went to his house to get the camera, I decided to take a peek. The photographs were really old, probably from the 19th century. The first one showed a gentleman with a thick mustache, top hat, and cane posing in profile. In the background, mountains and the sun. It was quite worn, and a layer of blackened mold covered the side of the figure. The other one was of a group of academics, young men in their overcoats, posing next to the train with spontaneous smiles, carrying bags hanging at their sides. It was also very old, perhaps from the transition from the 1800s to the 1900s, and still had a layer of mold. I hope Franco knows how to clean photos. It seems like we have an infestation here. However, something bothered me this time. The stain seemed more defined, not like mold spreading. It occupied the space in the photo between the young men. If they were more distant, I might consider it to be one of them. I moved on to the next one, a guy in a white tank top, military-style haircut, a dog tag around his neck. It was at this point I was sure something was wrong. The mold stain this time was bending over the guy, stopping at his face and falling over his shoulder on the other side, as if passing its arm over him. It just couldn't be natural. The lines that marked it were too defined, too specific. I started feeling uncomfortable with this, like I was being watched. A knock at the door made me jump in fright. Franco's voice came from outside. I rushed to open it, and as I saw him with the camera in hand, I was momentarily blinded by the flash. "This one will be great, very spontaneous," he exclaimed. I quickly called him inside and began to explain the situation. At first glance, he seemed skeptical. He said they were just stains and went on a monologue explaining what pareidolia is and how we seek patterns and shapes where there are none. But when we moved on to the next one, a more recent one from the 1970s, everything changed. A girl posed with her arms up, joyful. The lighting came from a bulb on the ceiling, primarily illuminating her, while in the background, something lurked. The mold stain now definitely was something. It seemed almost human, but in a way I can't explain. It made our heads ache at the time, and now, when I try to think about it, it starts to hurt again. "Yeah, I think you believe me now, huh?" I asked. "Okay, there's something weird with this. Look, let's stick to the initial plan and bury this thing." He looked again at the photo, preferably far away from here. I agreed. "So, do we have a shovel?" he questioned. I did have one, but it broke last month, and I haven't had time to buy a new one. "Well," Franco continued, "I still have my gardening tools. They're not exactly professional, but they'll do the trick. If you want, I can go get them," and I interrupted him. "No way I'm staying here alone." He pondered for a moment. "Okay, but we can't just leave this thing here alone. Who knows what might happen?" "Well, then let's take it with us," I suggested. "Honestly, I don't know. It's better to leave it here for now, and after we get everything, we take it back and never bring it back again." "So give me the key to your house and you stay here." "I won't. The house is mine." "Ha! I knew you were scared too." Okay, let's do this. Rock, paper, scissors." He said this already getting into position. I expertly prepared myself, trying to predict his movements and intentions, filled my hand and confidently threw scissors. To my misfortune and surprise, Franco lowered his fist unchanged and closed. "See, it's the same. I'll be right back, okay? Just start packing the photo so we can get rid of this as quickly as possible." "Oh, we'll get rid of this as quickly as possible." I mimicked his voice in a clumsy way as he closed the door. I began to pack those photos into the capsule again, trying not to look too much when I suddenly noticed a photo I hadn't seen before. And then my heart froze. The image showed my face, a withdrawn expression with a sudden flash that illuminated my face, hands slightly raised towards my face. It was the photo Franco had taken of me. The problem, however, was what was behind me. The stairs are in front of the door, and right at the top, facing in the same direction, is the door to my room. And in this image, unlike how I remembered leaving it in the morning, it was open. But that wasn't the worst part, no. In the gap formed between the wood and the wall, I could clearly see something. A face. Twisted and poorly formed, but still a face. It was like the mold stains seemed to be made of the same substance. Bug-eyed and reddened eyes just above a crooked and pus-filled mouth. I had been staring at the photo when I heard strange noises upstairs. Footsteps? Suddenly, the creaking of the bedroom door. I really don't know what this is. I ran and locked myself in the bathroom. I've heard some strange noises echoing through the house. They come and disappear, come back with no apparent time pattern. It's been more than 2 hours, and Franco hasn't returned. And he doesn't answer my calls or messages. I don't know what these photos are, but there's definitely something very wrong with them. I come from a small town in the US. I'd rather not say where. We've got one of those big national forests not too far off, though, and that's really the main appeal of living here. There's nothing else to do, nothing in town to do, and I'm not really the sort for crowds anyways. Wandering in the woods, though, going for hikes and exploring, it's dangerous, but nothing makes me quite as happy. It's a shame I won't be coming within a mile of those woods ever again. A couple weeks back, things were different. I'd go for a hike at least a dozen times a month. I only work a couple days a week, so I have a lot of free time to myself. I'm a programmer. Might be a bit of an odd choice for a nature junkie, but I can do my whole workload in a couple of afternoons, and as long as I tell my boss it took me the whole week, I get a full week's pay. And that gives me plenty of free time for what really matters to me. I was in the woods again, following an old trail I've been down more than a few times, when I noticed something I've never seen before. A branching path off to my right. I wondered why I'd never noticed it, but didn't think too much about it. It was a new adventure, and that's all that mattered. The trail led for at least a couple miles, maybe more. I was walking for nearly 2 hours before I reached it. And by it, I mean the most beautiful garden you've ever seen. A clearing in the forest with an absolute sea of strange, vibrant flowers. I walked carefully so as not to crush anything as I stepped through this Eden that I had stumbled upon. The flowers were huge, each petal the size of an oak leaf, and they varied in shade from deep sea blue to crimson and dark purple as well. I was sure somebody must have put them here, must be tending to them. I waited for a while, hoping I might be able to meet the one that had created such a magnificent place. But alas, nobody came, and the sun began to set. I knew better than to stay in the woods at night, so I packed up and left. For a moment, I pondered taking a flower with me, but that felt wrong. These weren't my flowers. This wasn't my garden. I didn't have the right to just take one, so I left for the day. Of course, I knew I would return. I needed to know who was responsible, who'd created this masterpiece. And I did return, no less than 4 times over the course of the week. Every time I'd go down the same path, arrive in the same garden, and savor the serene beauty of the place. There was nowhere like it, I was certain, in the entire world. But no matter how many times I came or how long I stayed, I never did catch a glimpse of the one who tends the garden. That bothered me to no end, and unfortunately, it made me lose my grip on common sense. I became sure that whoever was responsible must be coming around at night, and that if I wanted to meet them, I would need to do the same. The danger of wandering the forest at night no longer mattered to me. Bears and wolves, screw 'em. I would take that risk. Obsession makes someone do foolish things. And so, it was sunset when I first set upon the trail. I slept all afternoon, so I wasn't particularly tired as I walked, although my foolishness had become a little more apparent. Sunset gave way to dusk, gave way to night, and in the darkness, surrounded by towering trees with only starlight to illuminate the path before me, I am not ashamed to admit I was nervous. Afraid, even. But I never considered turning back. It was out of the question. I needed to know, you see. And so, when I reached that fork in the path, despite every instinct telling me that I should not be here, I didn't hesitate. Nearer I was to the garden, and I was sure that tonight, I would find them. The architect behind it, the artist who had painted for me a tapestry of Gaia's beauty. The garden looked different under the light of the stars and the crescent moon, but it was no less beautiful. Normally, I would have, as always, walked amongst the flowers and taken in their majesty more thoroughly. But I caught a glimpse of movement and found myself hiding behind a large tree. It could be a wild animal, a predator, I reasoned as I hid. But what I saw that night was nothing so sane or ordinary, for he had finally shown himself. The keeper of the garden had arrived, and I knew I never should have come here. It was a thing, to be sure. Not a man nor beast, but a thing. As hideous as the garden was beautiful. It wore a long, tattered red skirt, so I never got a glimpse at its legs, and I suppose that's for the best. Its arms were thin, little more than pale skin stretched over bone, and while it seemed to have ordinary proportions in regards to its upper arms, the forearms of the creature were at least twice as long as those of a man, and one dragged along the ground as it walked. The other carried a sack. I'll get to that part soon. It had a thin, emaciated body and no face, but from the top of its head all the way down to its navel and possibly below the skirt as well, there was a clustering, uneven line of deep black holes. It had no eyes, no ears, no mouth, no hair, and as I watched, it opened the sack it carried and began to feed the flowers. Inside the sack, it had carried the corpse of a young woman, bruised and stripped naked. It wrapped these long, thin fingers of one hand around the waist of the dead woman, lifting her up, and with the other it seized and twisted off her head with a sickening crunch. Then it held the head over the flowers and stepped through the garden, pouring her crimson essence upon each and every one. When the head was mostly drained, it gently moved it back into the bag and lifted the body, tipping it upside down and continuing the process. My mind had gone blank with fear. I was paralyzed, and then, behind me, I heard a high-pitched warbling whistle. I turned around but saw nothing. As I looked back, however, the keeper had disappeared. The paralysis had been broken, but the fear remained, and I bolted down the trail. I made no effort to remain quiet. I was sure the thing had seen me, and I had no intention of letting it catch me. No desire to see that horrible, emaciated body up close or to know what might hide in those dark holes along its body. I ran, and even as my stamina started to give way, I refused to stop, coughing and panting as I persisted. And then, suddenly, I was out of the woods. The path should have been several times longer than it was, thinking back. But at the time, I was just happy to have escaped. And then again, I heard the whistle and turned around. It came from a boy, something mimicking a young child. It wore a skirt not unlike that of the keeper and was similarly pale. While thin, scrawny even, it did have a bulging pot belly. It had neither nipples nor a belly button nor hair to speak of, but it was the face of this boy thing that made me shudder. I can't say nipples. It didn't have a belly button nor hair to speak of, but It was the face of this boy thing that made me shudder. Blind, white eyes, an overly large nose with skin stretched across the nostrils, and no lips, just exposed gums and teeth, forever forming a ghastly, predatory grin. It closed its mouth and the whistling stopped, and to my horror, a second mouth formed along the boy thing's potbelly and spoke in an impossibly deep voice.
You had best not return to the garden again. It was never meant for you.
I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, and so I found my second wind and ran further still, into town, as far from the woods as I could get before I collapsed from exhaustion. I woke up in the drunk tank. Those cold steel bars had never been so comforting. When I got out, I returned to my apartment and started to pack my things. I work online, as you know, so I have the freedom to move wherever I please. I'll go to the big city, start over. My plane leaves tonight. Because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the keeper and that boy thing. They're waiting for me in the garden. Waiting for the day that I'm willing to trade my life for one last glimpse of perfection. The story you just listened to was written by Skellapound. Thank you again for giving me permission to narrate your story. Out of jail, I resumed my search for the empty box. The box had taken both my mother and my father, and my best friend. When I found it, I planned to destroy it and set them free. It had all started with a package delivered to our front porch. It seemed that everyone got packages delivered to their front porch. There is only one such package that mails itself. While I was in jail, I received a letter. My lawyer had brought it to me, and I had accepted it. As it was slid across the table, I read the letter from a certain relative of a certain billionaire who owns one of the largest package delivery systems ever created. The letter detailed how it had all started with a deal made with something from the depths of time. It was a creature that hungered for human suffering, and the sort of suffering it craved was to trap people, body and soul, in its own world. It was the abyss of eternal darkness and Apollyon, and to look into the shadow cast by it was to be drawn into it, forever trapped. That is, unless the box were to be shown the light of the unseeing eye, a kind of spell that made a candle flame burn for a moment with heavenly light. That would dissipate the shadow and release all those trapped within. I had memorized the spell of the candle flame, and then the letter was taken away. My lawyer died 2 days later, having ended up in a hospital with alcohol poisoning. There was no way to get the letter after that, no way to find it. Not before it was destroyed with many other documents. It didn't matter. I had memorized the important part and learned the truth about the empty box. I had hunted for it in vain before, and if I had found it, I too would have fallen victim to it. It arrives like any package delivery, sent from somewhere that sounds familiar and addressed to the owner of the address, the recipient. The empty box feels like it sounds, entirely hollow, like there is nothing inside. When it is opened, there is darkness. I heard my mother say, "It's just an empty box." And then the darkness engulfed her and drew her into it. The box seemed almost shut, and my father, although terrified, opened it and looked inside. He too was drawn into it, wrapped in the darkness. I felt terrible fear and sweating, and my heart seemed to have stopped beating. The sweat on my body felt freezing, as though the heat were drawn into it. The cold air made me shudder as I stared in disbelief at the empty box, just sitting there. For a moment, I thought I could hear the screams of hundreds of people echoing quietly from within the empty box. That's when my best friend, Lucius, came out of our kitchen. "Where are your parents?" she asked. She sounded tough and fearless. I felt weak and small, terrified. I pointed at the empty box. "No, wait," I told Lucius, but she wasn't afraid of anything. "They're in the box?" she asked incredulously. "Yes," I gasped in horror, realizing moment by moment what had happened. I did not understand yet what the box had done. I had seen it, but I couldn't comprehend it. That's when Lucius opened the empty box, and it took her too. I screamed and fell out of my seat. I scrambled away from it and crawled as fast as I could outside. For a day, I lost my mind, wandering and babbling incoherently. When the police arrested me for loitering, I was seen by a psychiatrist, and they took a blood sample to determine if I might be on drugs. Eventually, I was released, but not before I gave a statement to the police about what had happened with the empty box. When I went home, the empty box was gone. I spent days feeling deranged, worried about my own mental health. What had happened was real, but there was no way to prove it. The best people in my life were gone, taken by the empty box. It was then that I was wandering down the street when I saw a package delivered to someone's porch. I stood and watched with trepidation, sensing somehow that the empty box was nearby. I could not be sure, but the closer I got, the more I felt it. I could hear the sounds of those who were trapped inside. Then a little old lady opened her front door. She opened the box right there on her porch. And like those before, the darkness in the empty box reached out and grabbed her and pulled her into it. How a whole person can be sucked into something like that defies physics. It's like they shrink as they near the rim of the box, and then they're in it, and the flaps close. Sort of like a black hole, I guess. Fear overcame me, and I ran away. When I was hidden at home, I slowly calmed down. I realized I had to go back to find the empty box and perhaps find a way to free everyone. Maybe it could be burned, and in destroying the cardboard, it would lose its power and release those who were inside. That's what I thought. So I began to wander around, searching for it. Whenever I saw a package upon someone's porch, I would run up and shake it to make sure it wasn't empty. I didn't find the empty box again. I kept getting in trouble. People caught me on camera, and there were barking dogs and threats with guns and all sorts of trouble. People don't appreciate porch pirates, and that is what I had become, because nobody believed me. And then one day I was arrested for my trespasses and suspicion of theft. I was charged with numerous counts of porch piracy, none of which I was guilty, for I had never actually stolen any packages. It didn't matter. I spent 11 months in jail. While I was there, I told my story to my lawyer, who seemed to believe me. My lawyer wrote to the owner of the package delivery company asking for a resolution of my claims. Neither of us expected a reply, but it was worth the effort because there is no telling when a billionaire might turn out to be someone who will help someone like me. The letter reached someone who knew the truth and decided to write back, offering to help by telling me how to undo the curse. When I was finally out of jail, I resumed my quest. I became much craftier at searching for the elusive empty box, and I got a job working for a delivery company. With my own truck and uniform, it became much easier to search people's front porch package deliveries. Anyone who caught me didn't think anything unusual was happening. They just presumed I had business on their porch, lifting and shaking their package and then replacing it where I had found it. I'm still searching for the empty box, and when I find it, I will cast the spell of the candle flame upon it. I will destroy the evil that mails itself from one home to another, destroying families unknown to the rest of the world. Not all missing people will stay missing forever. Some of them are going to come back someday. On the day when I find the empty box. I thought he was gone, that I had finally escaped his reach, which had seemed infinite at the time. Now, I know that it is. He began appearing in my dreams when I was 3 years old, possibly earlier, but that's the earliest the archives of my memory will allow me to access. His 2 legs impossibly long and spindly, his arms non-existent. Only the stub of a torso and the small head atop it, grossly disproportionate to the rest of him. He crept through the cellars of my mind, waiting in the deep corners, silent and colorless as an old movie. In my dreams, I wandered these hallways in fear, never sure how I got there or how to get out. When I tentatively touched the wall, my fingers recoiled at the soft dampness of it. Then always, at some point during my travels, the corridors would go quiet. Pipes ceased their resigned sighs. The floor stopped creaking beneath my reluctant feet. The dark world around me held its breath. And I knew he was near. At this point, strange things began to appear as I traversed the winding halls, looking for something I never wanted to find. Open doorways materialized, and though I tried not to look, I always did. A man with a horse's head stood at the bathroom sink, looking in the mirror. When I passed, his head slowly turned to look at me. The horsehead's eyes were empty and black. The body of the man lifted his hand and pointed a finger forward. I could feel its eyes on me as I continued walking. Another doorway, this time with a woman in it. She wore a white, short-sleeved blouse speckled with small blue polka dots, and her curly hair stuck out unnaturally from her head like a Medusa. Her face was stretched into a maniacal grin, and her eyes held the same empty blackness as the horse's. As I watched her, she began bobbing her head from side to side, her grin unwavering. Her hair stuck out like wires, unmoving despite the increasingly frenzied movements of her head. And then, against my better judgment and in spite of my terror, I asked her where I could find him. Her head snapped to attention, suddenly still as death. Her eyes met mine, and the blackness in them threatened to swallow me whole. She began laughing, a shrill cackle that rattled my bones. And then she gave chase. My footsteps pounded on the ground, but I couldn't hear them. The blood roared in my ears like an ocean. I could feel her behind me. She was catching up, and suddenly I felt her arms around my chest, clammy and fleshy, and her wicked heart beating through her shirt. We were falling now, falling so fast that it seemed after a while that we weren't moving at all. And then, as if we were suspended midair, he appeared out of nowhere and walked toward me through the thin, cold atmosphere. His embrace felt like a phantom limb, like the part of my body that touched his was negative space, something that ceased to exist. And then I'd wake up. As the dream continued through the years, they came to include more strange encounters. Discs floating through the air that cut me to ribbons upon contact, my blood dripping viscous black. Flowers that melted when I leaned down to smell their bright scents that soon devolved into the odor of death. Black holes swirling around me, their centers as empty as the eyes of the residents of my dreams. I started seeing things too, remnants of the dreams in my waking life. The corner of my eye would catch the horseman standing at the bathroom sink, which would turn out to be my brother wearing a baseball cap and washing his hands. My mother's smile sometimes appeared a little too wide, a little too eager. Every now and then my father's dark eyes would seem to deepen a few shades, a small smile curling at his lips. And the man with the spidery legs was always in the back of my mind, waiting for me to have a fleeting moment of joy so he could appear and destroy it. His wiry frame cast a permanent shadow over my life. And then, when I was 20, it stopped. No more bad dreams, no more catching my family's eyes in unexpected moments and finding something there that I didn't want to see. No more searching the folds of my cerebral cortex for the monsters hiding there. For years, I remained terrified. Every night when I went to sleep, I was sure he would revisit me, bringing all of his horrible associates with him. My husband helped. He'd rub my back until I fell into a small, dreamless sleep, devoid of the sickly corridors I had traveled in my youth. I'm 33 now. My last encounter with the man was 13 years ago. Until today. I work as a school counselor, and I was late picking up my daughter Lane due to the traffic from an equestrian team hosting a large event at the high school. Her teacher, a kindly older lady named Mrs. Dunworth, had agreed to watch Lane for the extra half hour. The wind had really picked up by the time I arrived at the school. As I walked towards the building, a piece of paper blew into my face, held there for a brief moment by the wind. Dang it, I muttered, disentangling it from the hair whipping around my face. A black and white flyer for the school carnival. That should be fun for Lane, I thought. Noting the date and trying to remember if our family had anything planned for that day. Something at the bottom of the page caught my eye. A clown walking on impossibly high stilts. His grin erectus photocopied eyes like two black holes. A chill ran through me. You're being stupid, I thought, crumpling up the flyer and throwing it in the trash can outside of the school. Anyway, Mrs. Dunworth will send out a reminder about the carnival. I walked into the building, making my way through the winding hallways to Lane's classroom. When I stepped into the room, Lane got up from her desk and ran to me, giving me a big hug. Thanks so much, Mrs. D, I said, adjusting my briefcase on my shoulder. Of course, Mrs. Dunworth said brightly. I walked over to Lane's desk to collect her things, and my eyes fell to the drawing she had been working on before I had arrived. The spindly legs looked just as I remembered. Let's go, I said, my voice suddenly weak. Do you like my drawing, Mom? Lane asked, picking it up to give me a better look. I stammered. It's beautiful, Mrs. Dunworth said. I looked up. I hadn't noticed that she had joined us at Lane's desk. Beautiful, she repeated, looking at Lane. Her eyes were dark. Her polka dot blouse clung to her underarm, sweat stains yellowing the material. Let's go, I said, grabbing Elaine's arm. Mrs. Dunworth blocked the aisle. Aren't you forgetting something? She asked me, holding up the paper. I hadn't seen it before, but there was a small, lonely-looking girl wrapped in the spindly man's arms. I shoved Mrs. Dunworth and ran out of the classroom, holding Lane's arm in a vice grip. We didn't stop running until we were in the car. I turned on the engine and sat there, hands on the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. Lane sat in her booster seat in the back, panting. She didn't ask any questions. That evening, Lane came up to me and my husband and handed me a photocopied flyer. I didn't have to look at it to know what it was. Save the date, she said, the corners of her mouth curling up into a smile. Waking up in the cozy lodge on Mount Lornite, I eagerly embraced a day of skiing. The slopes offered a thrilling adventure, with powdery snow and stunning vistas. After a lively day on the mountain, I joined fellow skiers at the lodge's cafe, sharing stories by the fireplace. Exploring the lodge's amenities revealed a spa and a charming library. The evening brought a gourmet dinner, and I ended the day stargazing on the deck. The perfect blend of adventure and relaxation made my first day on Mount Lornite unforgettable. As night fell on the lodge at Mount Lornite, an eerie symphony of crashing trees and inhuman screeches filled the air. The lodge's deck offered a haunting view of the turmoil in the forest, with unsettling sounds emanating from a nearby 700-foot cliff face. Inside, guests exchanged uneasy glances, seeking refuge in the lodge's warmth. The staff reassured us, attributing the unsettling noises to natural forces. Despite the mysterious backdrop, the lodge maintained its comforting ambiance. As I settled into my room, the unsettling sounds persisted, creating a restless atmosphere. The night at Mount Lornite's lodge unfolded as a surreal blend of awe and unease, leaving unanswered questions lingering in the mountain air. In the dim moonlight on the lodge's deck, the unsettling symphony of sounds reached a chilling climax. Intrigued by the mysterious commotion, I cautiously peered into the night. Suddenly, a grotesque creature emerged from the shadows, its form illuminated in the moon's eerie glow. The creature stood tall, its silhouette a nightmarish amalgamation of sinewy limbs and gnarled features. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, capturing the darkness within its twisted form. Jagged spines adorned its back, casting ominous shadows as it moved. As the creature noticed me on the balcony, its screech intensified, sending shivers down my spine. The sound was a blend of anguish and malevolence, echoing through the mountainous terrain. The creature's movements were unsettlingly agile, each step accompanied by a disturbing contortion of its twisted anatomy. Its skin, if one could call it that, appeared mottled and scarred, revealing a history of unknown horrors. The creature's elongated limbs terminated in claws that seemed capable of tearing through anything in its path. The air was thick with an acrid scent as the creature approached, revealing its predatory intent. Frozen in terror, I watched as the creature locked eyes with me, its gaze penetrating the veil between reality and nightmare. The balcony became a stage for a macabre dance, the creature's screeches and my pounding heart forming an eerie duet. As the night unfolded, the lodge's once comforting ambiance transformed into an unsettling refuge. The creature's presence lingered in the shadows, leaving an indelible mark on the night at Mount Lornite's lodge. The symphony of the mountain had taken a dark turn, and the creature's haunting visage remained etched into my memory. The grotesque creature, its form twisted and nightmarish, abruptly broke into a demonic sprint towards me on the balcony. Its movements were a blur as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. Panic surged through me as the creature, fueled by an unknown malevolence, slammed its full weight against the cabin door, shaking the structure with each ferocious impact. The door strained under the relentless assault, groaning as if resisting the intrusion of a force beyond comprehension. Fear clenched my chest as I braced against the balcony railing, the creature's screeches now replaced by a thunderous crashing against the door. Then, as suddenly as it begun, the cacophony ceased. A haunting silence enveloped the lodge, leaving only the echoing resonance of the creature's last impact against the door. Uncertainty hung in the air as I cautiously surveyed the surroundings. Just as a false sense of relief settled, a chilling tapping commenced. It was rhythmic and deliberate, echoing from every window of the lodge. The creature, it seemed, had shifted its focus to finding another entry point. The taps were like morbid percussion, creating a suspenseful symphony of dread. Each tap felt like a sinister whisper, the creature methodically exploring every inch of the lodge in its pursuit. Shadows danced across the window as it sought a vulnerability to exploit. The once welcoming lodge now felt like a fortress under siege, its very foundation tested by an otherworldly force. The tapping crescendoed into a nerve-wracking rhythm, intensifying the suspense. I stood paralyzed, caught in the heart-pounding climax of the surreal encounter. The night at Mount Lornite's lodge had evolved into a harrowing struggle, with the creature's relentless pursuit echoing in the haunting symphony of the mountain's mysteries. As the creature relentlessly battered against the cabin door, a haunting familiarity swept over me, transporting my thoughts to a chilling incident from my past. Years ago, I had been caught in a fierce current while swimming too close to a dam. The force was relentless, pulling me under with an unforgiving grip. In those harrowing moments, I felt the icy embrace of imminent doom, the realization sinking in that there was nothing I could do but wait for the inevitable. Miraculously, I managed to break free just before the current dragged me into the dam's abyss. That brush with mortality left an indelible mark, a visceral understanding of the helplessness that arises when confronted by forces beyond control. It was a moment when the fight-or-flight response faltered, and the stark reality of one's vulnerability took center stage. Now, on the lodge's balcony, as the grotesque creature relentlessly tried to find a way in with brute force, the same sense of impending doom resurfaced. The cabin, my supposed refuge, felt like a sinking vessel in a stormy sea. Each impact of the creature's assault echoing the relentless pull of that dam's current. Helplessly gripping the balcony railing, the feeling of impending doom intensified. The creature's unrelenting determination mirrored the inexorable force of the dam's current. Flight or fight realized its futility, and the cold grip of vulnerability settled in. much like that moment when I was caught in the merciless current. As the creature abruptly fell silent, the lodge became a crucible of anticipation. The tapping on the windows, reminiscent of that fateful current's pull, evoked a chilling déjà vu. In those suspenseful seconds, I stood paralyzed, entwined with the echoes of past helplessness, bracing for the unknown as the creature sought entry. The night at Mount Lornite's lodge had become a surreal tapestry where past and present converged in a symphony of vulnerability and dread. A split-second decision made my jump off the balcony, and I bolted for the skis. The creature realized what I had done and screeched after me. As I descended the mountain, the enraged creature pursued me with relentless fury. Its mutated form now oozed grotesque tendrils, and its elongated limbs resembled twisted vines. The once molten eyes now glowed with a sickly radiance, casting a haunting glow over the night. Navigating treacherous trails and hurtling over snow-covered crevices, the creature closed in with a ghastly speed. Each step it took left a trail of mutated ooze-like substance in the snow, painting a nightmare picture of its relentless pursuit. Realizing the imminent danger, I accelerated towards the cliff edge. The creature's screeches intensified, echoing through the mountainous landscape as it closed the gap. Just as its razor-sharp claws slashed at my calf, I slammed my ski poles into the ground with a desperate force. The abrupt stop sent me hurtling forwards, my legs dangling over the cliff's edge. The creature, unable to halt its momentum, barreled off the cliff with a gut-wrenching screech. Time seemed to slow as the night air filled with the grotesque symphony of the creature's demise. The fall was a descent into nightmarish finality. The creature, impaled on a shard rock at the cliff's base, writhed in agony. Its tendrils flailed wildly, leaving a gruesome trail of mutated substance in the snow. The screeches, now distorted and gurgling, filled the air until the mountain fell silent once more. As I caught my breath, the eerie glow from the creature's eyes dimmed, and the mountain embraced a tranquil stillness. The gory tableau at the cliff's base stood as a testament to the night's surreal horrors. The once vibrant trails and snow-covered crevices bore witness to a harrowing chase, concluding in the chilling silence that followed the creature's final, gory descent into oblivion. Limping back to the lodge, my adrenaline-fueled escape left me in desperate need of medical attention. The once cozy refuge had transformed into a scene of chaos, marked by the aftermath of the creature's rampage. Lodge staff, shaken and bewildered, rushed to assist me, offering the care I desperately needed. As dawn painted the horizon with hues of orange and pink, a surreal turn of events unfolded. Armored vehicles rolled up to the lodge, each marked with the insignia of a black hawk clutching a globe. Men in tactical gear disembarked, a formidable presence against the serene mountain backdrop. The air buzzed with an air of secrecy as they approached, their movements precise and purposeful. They presented a non-disclosure agreement, demanding my signature in exchange for their intervention and aid. The document bore the acronym CSO and showcased a logo depicting a black hawk gripping the earth in its talons. The clandestine nature of the encounter unfolded as I signed the NDA, sealing my silence about the night's bizarre events. The men, presumably from the covert organization represented by the CSO, efficiently coordinated with the lodge staff. They examined the aftermath, collecting samples and analyzing the mutated residue left by the creature. Their movements spoke of a well-practiced routine, as if such incidents were not as uncommon as one might believe. As the sun fully emerged, the armored vehicles departed as swiftly as they arrived, leaving the lodge in an eerie calm. The mountain, now bathed in the warm glow of morning, seemed to conceal the secrets of the night's encounter. The events of that harrowing night remained a closely guarded secret, locked behind the signed NDA and the enigmatic logo of the CSO. The lodge, once a sanctuary, now bore witness to the convergence of nature's mysteries and the clandestine operations of an organization that navigated the thin line between reality and the supernatural. The drive down the mountain was a journey through the aftermath of a surreal night. The peacefulness of the winding roads provided a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier. The first light of dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in a soft glow, casting an ethereal aura over the mountain. However, as the road neared the cliff's base, where the creature met its grisly demise, a profound unease settled in. The armored vehicles had left no trace, but the spot where the creature had landed was frozen in time. The mutated residue, a grotesque testament to the creature's violent end, marred the pristine snow. The visage and ooze had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder of the unearthly encounter. A shiver ran down my spine as the road offered a close-up view of the remnants. The creature, once a nightmarish force, was no longer present, yet its essence lingered in the eerie silence. The frozen imprints and shadows in the snow hinted at the grotesque finale that had transpired just hours earlier. Caught in the grip of an uncanny chill, I noticed the creature's shadow seemingly slinking into the woods of Mount Lornite. Dismissing it as a trick of the mind, I continued the descent, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. The rational part of my mind attributed the fleeting image to fatigue and the lingering effects of a night filled with horrors and creatures of myth. As I drove from the mountain's embrace, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. The tranquility of the morning seemed to wash away the night's ordeal. The creature, the CSO, and the enigmatic events on Mount Lornite faded into the rearview mirror, leaving behind a lingering sense of mystery and the profound realization that some secrets were best left undisturbed in the shadows of the unknown. Signing off for now. Until next time. M. I was riding my bike through the snow to get to school. It should have been canceled, but apparently our school was the only school that didn't get a snow day. I was really looking forward to staying in my house and playing video games on my brand new PS5. But as we watched the news, anxiously waiting for our school to be on snow day schedule, the name Hamilton High was never said. As I reached for the doors of my high school, my friend Rick came running through the front entrance. "Henry, there's something wrong on the second floor. I found Mrs. Merriweather and she was acting weird. She tore off her own arm," he said frantically. He rambled on about dead zombie students and teachers eating their own limbs. Before I could respond, he ran away. I thought he had been drinking and was incredibly out of his mind, so I went in anyway. Everything was normal, so I figured he was being a bit delulu and decided to go to class. I climbed the steps to the second floor where my homeroom was. When I walked in, everyone was missing. That was a bit strange because at least the teacher should have been there. Mr. Nude always came 5 minutes before the bell rang. I started to notice that the hallways were also empty, but the first floor was buzzing with students, so that was odd. The bell rang and no one had showed up. I decided to check the other classrooms to see if there was any sign of another human apart from myself. Every single classroom was empty, and Mrs. Merriweather, whose classroom was next door to mine, was missing. She was never not here, so I was starting to get pretty freaked out now. There was one particular classroom I hadn't checked yet, one that caught my attention. I began walking towards it, and something in my head screamed at me to run, but I was on full-on autopilot by now, so of course, I ignored it. As I approached the classroom, I looked back only to see that the stairs that were once there had disappeared, and the hallway was now nothing but a black void. The lights were flickering, and I was getting a bit lightheaded. I was starting to think that Rick was right, but I wanted to know what exactly it was that he saw. I was definitely not in Hamilton High anymore. I turned on the lights in the classroom, and what I saw sent a cold shiver down my spine. There were blood stains everywhere. Dark, dry blood. I could smell the sweet, metallic odor from the doorway. It was nauseating. I tried my best to not throw up and kept exploring. The desks were scattered everywhere. The papers were all over the ground. Some dated back to 1995, which is weird because our school opened in 2007. A dead body lay in the corner of the room near the teacher's desk. It looked like it had been dead for ages. Meanwhile, looking like it had only been dead for a few minutes. I decided to look out of the window to make sure I was still in my school, but when I looked out, I saw nothing but a second black void. A noise startled me out of the trance after seeing the void, and I spun around in a daze. Someone just locked me in the room. That's when I saw it. A black figure peeking at me from the corner, but as quickly as I saw it, it was gone. And the dead body was also missing. I ran towards the door and started pounding and screaming for help. The door finally gave in and I sprinted out of the classroom and ran until my legs burned and my throat was dry as hay. I don't remember the hallway being this long. I turned around and at the end of the hall, I saw that black figure standing beside someone. That someone was Mr. Nude. Mr. Nude, thank goodness you're here. We need to leave. Something is very wrong with this place. I opened my mouth to say something else, but I was cut short when I saw the shadow going into Mr. Nude's body. A horrible, ear-piercing scream reverberated throughout the hall. I looked over to the source of the sound, barely able to see because of the migraine forming in the back of my head. The scream had come from Mr. Nude. I covered my ears and fell to the ground. When I opened my eyes, Mr. Nude was gone. But when I looked the other way, he was back, with my classmates from homeroom, some other students, the dead body from earlier, and Mrs. Merriweather. Some had arms missing. Some had legs missing, and some had their eyes gouged out and their guts spilling onto the floor. The ones that did have eyes had dark, black bags under them, and some had red irises or pure black eyes. Rot stained their faces, and instead of nails, they had long, black claws. Mr. Nude started to tear off his own arm, and he ate it as if it were a chicken leg. I ran away. I was not going to end up like them. I frantically looked for a sign of the stairs, but I was pulled down by an infected. It took hold of my leg and started to bite it. I kicked as hard as I could to get free. When I finally got free from its grasp, everything returned to normal. I was laying on the floor, leg dripping with blood, and exhausted out of my mind. I ran down the stairs and collapsed. A teacher found me lying on the floor unconsciously and called an ambulance. Later that day, I woke up in the hospital. I convinced myself that none of this was real, until I saw the bandage around my leg. The nurse had told me that they found a virus in my blood and that I had had a blood transfusion earlier. I started to feel weird, so something was obviously wrong. I wanted to eat human skin. And I had the urge to tear off my own arm. I needed to go back to the school. I needed to go back to the second floor. My home. I don't know how long I have before I turn into one of them. But if someone knows what's going on, please send help. Studying abroad alone could be tough. Even without considering the difficulty of the course itself, my study in the US has been quite challenging, especially in the financial aspect. Everything here was so expensive compared to back home. I felt upset every time I did my monthly budgeting. Housing, food, tuition, and transportation, they all added up to a frightening amount. So I started taking a part-time job. It was a medium-sized Thai restaurant just about 15 minutes from my dormitory. All the employees there were all Thai, and they immediately hired me as a waitress for a simple reason: being able to speak both Thai and English decently. Although I was the youngest there, I fit in easily, and everyone welcomed me in as the little sister of the team. It was one of those rare occurrences where when the management claimed that they had worked together like a family, they really meant it. The loneliness of being in a vastly different cultural environment bonded us, and we always looked out for one another. Overall, it was a really good workplace. The pay was not bad, and I also got paid extra with some free Thai meal every shift. The food was far from authentic. My mom would faint if she saw the chef put broccolis and carrots into green curry. But the part where we crowded into the kitchen and chit-chatted over a hot meal together before the shift started was what I looked forward to the most each day. It was a little wholesome moment that reminded me of my family back home. There was one extra task that I needed to do each day before the meal, though. On the far corner of the restaurant was an old wooden shelf holding a small doll of a boy wearing a traditional Thai costume. This deity was called Kumintong. The word Kumintong meant a golden boy. The practice of adopting Kumintong was a very old belief dating back hundreds of years, and somehow it still survived until today. Ask any Thai person you know about this, and you might hear an interesting anecdote. Kumintong's origin was quite morbid, as expected. In the past, dead fetuses of children who died while still in their mother's womb were roasted and dried by a practitioner of black magic to create a Kumintong. Through a specific ritual, the spirit of the stillborn babies would be invoked to possess these dried corpses. The owner could then adopt them and worship them, feeding them food like a real child. Obviously, you couldn't use stillborns to create Kumintong now, so people opted to use dolls instead. Still creepy, but it definitely resulted in less grave robbing, if I had to guess. People believe that the Kumintong would bring luck and prosperity to any household that took good care of it. My grandmother also adopted one at her home in Bangkok. She always had it ever since she moved there 60 years ago. One of the stories she would tell me all the time when I was young was about the one time she forgot to turn off the stove before going to bed. She told me that she had a bizarre dream that night where she saw a small child dressed in traditional Thai outfit running in her house, giggling like he was trying to show her something. She felt like someone was pulling her leg and then woke up to the smell of a burning kitchen. Luckily, she was able to put out the fire very quickly, and until today, she still believed that the Kumintong came to warn her about the fire in her dream. Noi, the owner of the restaurant, must have held the same strong belief as my grandmother. I had never met her, but our manager told us that she was quite superstitious. Apparently, she came to the US with almost nothing, but somehow managed to buy the restaurant at a very favorable price. Not only that, a famous food blogger came in a few years ago and left a good review, resulting in the business picking up very quickly. Noi credited all these lucky events to the power of the Kumintong. Therefore, it was crucial for her that we treated the Kumintong with utmost respect. We had to treat it like a real child. I was never the person who would believe in these supernatural deities, but in Thai, we had a phrase saying, if you don't believe in it, don't disrespect it. That phrase was something I lived by all my life, so when the manager asked me to take a small plate of food to the Kumintong, I complied. Kumintong, the dinner is ready, please enjoy, I murmured to the doll as I placed the tray of food and a glass of red Fanta on the shrine. Yes, red Fanta. As absurd as it may sound, Kumintong's choice of drink was apparently strawberry soda. People used to offer the Kumintong blood in the past, but not anymore. It was a common agreement that since the red Fanta and blood were both red, they should be an acceptable substitute. It was just a normal day for me. I completed my daily ritual of offering food to the Kumintong and went about my day, getting ready for the restaurant to open at 6. It had been raining all afternoon without a sign of stopping, so I expected it to be one of those slower days. Around 15 minutes to 6, the first customer showed up. They were a family of 3 consisting of a father in his late 30s, a tired-looking mother, and a young son dangling in her arms. The child was about 3 or 4, which was the worst age to be out in a public space. Most of the time they were not old enough to learn to behave properly in public, but they were not young enough to be confined to the child's seat for the entirety of the meal either. I glanced at my manager, Namwan, who returned me a look that said, "Go deal with them, please." "Good evening, sir. I'm afraid we won't be opening until 6, I said politely. "We understand, but can we just wait here? I have a reservation at 600 Gym. We plan to go to the park before coming here, but, you know." The father gestured to the pouring rain outside. "So we are a little early." "Of course." I led him and his family to the reserved table right under the Kumanthong shrine. We'll let you know when we're ready to take your order. Would you like some drinks meanwhile? Yes, just water. Yes, just water, the father said. Daddy, can I have a Coke? The boy asked as his mother placed him on a chair. Fine. Water and a can of Coke then, the father gave in. The kitchen was already busy even though no order had come in yet. The chef was thawing the meat and cutting vegetables while the kitchen hands were busy preparing spring roll fillings. I squeezed past them to the fridge where we kept all the soft drinks. There was some iced tea and lemonade soda, but no Coke. Are we out of Coke, Panaman? I asked the restaurant's manager, who was wrapping spring rolls nearby. I told you to refill it last night, didn't I, Leg? Namwan shouted at one of the kitchen hands. Oh, sis, I'm so sorry, but I forgot, he shouted back. Oh, this guy, Namwan sighed deeply, then turned to me. Fa, can you please go buy some from the grocery store near the bus stop? Just take the money from the cash register. I didn't want to go outside in this weather, but someone had to do it, and it was better if I did it before more customers arrived. Since everyone else was busy, I decided to take one for the team. I grabbed the umbrella and started walking. The store was just 2 blocks away, but it took me almost 20 minutes to return. I bought 2 packs, which turned out to be heavier than I anticipated, especially while trying to balance them with one hand while opening the umbrella with the other. Despite my best efforts, my apron was soaked and I couldn't stop trembling. This chilly weather was something a person from a tropical country like me could never get used to. By the time I came back, the restaurant had become much more packed. A big family arrived without a reservation, and Namwan was busy rearranging tables and chairs to accommodate them. I quickly changed my apron, grabbed a can of Coke, and walked over to the first family. The mother and father were engrossed in a conversation about politics and weren't paying attention to their son. The boy had climbed onto his chair to the Kumanthong shrine, and to my horror, he was drinking from the glass of red Fanta meant as an offering. Noi would be furious if she saw that. Oh no, I'm sorry, but please don't drink from that. I tried to stop the boy. Oh no, I'm so sorry, but please don't drink from that. I tried to stop the boy, but I hesitated to touch other people's children without permission. The father eventually broke away from his conversation and looked at his son with an annoyed expression. Jacob, get down from there, he commanded. But I am thirsty, the boy whined. Where's my Coke? It's right here. I'm sorry it took a while. I apologized. I took their order, but before I left, I decided to remove the food tray from the Kumanthong shrine as well. Less than half the soda remained in the glass. Jacob had also eaten the small fish cake and rice that were offered to the Kumanthong. Although I didn't believe in the Kumanthong, I still thought it was quite disrespectful for his parents to let him do that. I brought the tray back to the kitchen. The kid at table 14 ate the offering, I told my manager. Should I refill them? What kind of parents let their child eat from a random shelf? Namwan complained as she handed the long list of orders to the chef. Yeah, we should refill that. But first, Fa, we need 12 extra champagne glasses for table 12. Table 2. There's some in the dishwasher, but probably not enough. I'll look for some more in the storage room. More customers kept coming in, and I was so busy I forgot to refill the offering. An hour or so passed, and I was helping a customer with his receipt when Jacob's mother approached me at the counter with a hysterical expression on her face. My son is missing, she screamed. I took him to the bathroom and I got distracted from a call. He didn't come out, so I went in to check it, but he wasn't there. This was definitely something above my pay grade. I called Namwan over, and she consoled the panicking mother while sending some of us to look for the boy around the restaurant area. I was sent out to the balcony. The rain had not stopped, and the wind was blowing cold droplets of rain into my face. I started shivering almost immediately. Our restaurant was on the second floor of a 4-story building. The storage room and the bathroom were only accessible through the long balcony outside. A flight of stairs led down from the balcony to the parking lot. I saw Jacob's father walking around in the rain, calling out to his son. His yelling was swallowed by the sound of the heavy rain. There were many cars parked there, but there was no sign of any other human. I went into the bathroom just to be sure. Obviously, it was empty. According to Jacob's mother, she was waiting for him in front of the bathroom, so there was no way she wouldn't have seen him leaving. Jacob might be able to fit into a small window if he tried, but I doubted he could reach it. As I was about to leave, I heard a faint giggle. Jacob? Come on out, your parents are looking for you, I said, turning around. Nobody was there. I must have confused the sound of the rain for a child's giggle. For the storage room, it was harder to tell if someone was there at first glance. We didn't clean it as often as we should, so it was all dusty and full of junk. Employees' lockers were located on one side, several boxes of unopened dry ingredients on the other. Broken chairs and tables were stacked near the corner of the room, with cleaning supplies scattered all over. There was only a single light bulb in there, and it was not very bright. At first glance, there was no one there. And then, I heard it again. It was the sound of a child laughing, and this time I was sure of it. The giggling sound was soft and belonged to a boy around Jacob's age. I was very spooked by this point. Jacob? Are you there? He's not here, just me, a boy's voice replied, and I froze. He replied to me in Thai. Suddenly, my eyes caught a movement in the dark corner of the room. I believed I saw a small head covered with black hair in a traditional Thai topknot, moving into the shadow and disappearing. Remembering how Jacob was blonde, I screamed and slammed the door closed, hitting my back against the balcony's railing as I backpedaled out of there. When I returned to the restaurant, Jacob's father was back from his futile search. He was soaked wet and defeated. Jacob's mother was crying hysterically. The police arrived shortly after that. From their whispers, it seemed they were considering Jacob's disappearance as a kidnapping case. I gulped and turned to Namwan, who was biting her nails anxiously. Namwan, does any one of us bring a child here? I asked. What are you talking about? Namwan asked. None of us have kids, and even if we do, Pinoy would never allow us to bring them here. I see, I murmured. Did you see something, Fa? She asked, suddenly becoming attentive. You should tell the police if you saw anything strange. I don't know if I saw what I think I saw. I glanced at the Kumanthong doll on the shelf. Namwan followed my gaze and gasped quietly. She then disappeared into the kitchen and came out with a refilled glass of red Fanta and a plate of food. The police watched in confusion as Namwan brought the plate to the Kumanthong shrine, but she didn't seem to care. She pressed her hands together and started to pray in silence. As I watched her, I also called out to the Kumanthong in my mind and asked him to help find the missing child. Not even 10 minutes had passed when one of the policemen ran into the restaurant. We found him! We could not believe our eyes as another policeman walked in with Jacob cuddled in his arms. I didn't get a good look at him because he was quickly carried away to the ambulance with his parents rushing behind. We all had a big collective sigh of relief, but then the policeman started to look very serious. We found him in one of the bathroom stalls. Apparently, he never left. The policeman said, You guys did check the bathroom, right? Countless times, Namwan insisted. Both his parents went in to look for him. Almost all of our employees went in. Even one of you guys went in when you first arrived, remember? This is really strange. The policeman scratched his head. How did none of us see him during the 2 hours he was missing? He must have been playing with Kumanthong. Perhaps the Kumanthong didn't want his playtime to be over yet. One of the kitchen hands murmured. Namwan turned to glare at him. After all, she didn't want them to think we were a bunch of superstitious crazy people. Although it was still unexplained at the time, the police accepted their win and left. My life resumed its normal routine. We never saw Jacob's family again, which was understandable. I wouldn't want to come back either if I were them. I still thought about them and that weird encounter in the storage room from time to time. And I brought it up with Namwan one day. Actually, a policeman dropped by a week after that, Namwan said. You weren't here since it wasn't your shift, but he came to see if we saw any suspicious individuals that day. They suspected that something emotionally traumatic happened to that kid. Why do they think so? I asked. Because the boy wouldn't speak to anyone after the whole ordeal. His parents said it was like he was a different person, and when he finally talked, he spoke in a language they didn't understand. His diet also changed. He wouldn't eat anything except pig blood curd. They were pretty spooked and concerned, it seemed. Namwan handed me the tray. Anyway, take this to the Kumanthong, will you? I looked at the tray. The glass was filled with Coke this time, and the food offering was not Thai food, but a small portion of mac and cheese and 2 pieces of chicken nuggets. Mac and cheese? Namwan shrugged nervously. Well, I just think that maybe he might prefer this. We never heard from Jacob's family again. Noi still refused to move the shrine from its original place. Therefore, we just tried to avoid seating families with young children near the Kumintong shrine nowadays. So my message goes out. Please make sure to remind your children to behave when out in public, especially when you visit a Thai restaurant. Otherwise, the child you take back home might not actually be yours. I never understood my mother's dread of the woods until this Christmas. Christmas has always been my favorite time of year, and I consider myself somewhat of an expert at decking the halls. Since I was a kid, I would wake up early on Black Friday to string garlands, hang lights, and meticulously arrange little figurines of elves and Santa Claus around the house. This always concerned my parents greatly, who did not care for this time of the season. Their disdain always puzzled me, especially given that my mother had immigrated from Germany, a place renowned for its incredible Christmas celebrations, as a child. Despite their chronic Grinchism, my mom always gritted her teeth and allowed me to partake in the season with one caveat: no Christmas tree. I accepted this bargain without hesitation, for my mother's fear of trees was well known to the family and not for entirely unfounded reasons. When my mother was a child, she and her younger sister awoke early one Christmas morning to a picturesque winter wonderland. The window panes were frosty and fluffy, and new fallen snow covered the ground. They snuck out of their rooms and were dazzled by all the presents under the glittering Christmas tree. They stood momentarily, holding hands, entranced by the golden spectacle. Despite their overwhelming urge to start opening gifts, the order from their parents had been clear: wait to go outside and open gifts until their parents awoke. By the thunderous sound of their father snoring from their parents' bedroom, they could tell they would not rise for several hours. Minutes passed, and then hours, as the girls grew increasingly bored and impatient, the gifts taunting them from under the tree. They decided to collect chestnuts from the nearby grove to pass the time. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire certainly would lessen their parents' anger for disobeying them. They bundled up and began shuffling through the powdery snow toward the tree line. The grove was just beyond a dark thicket of woods. The bare boughs of the tree creaked as they swayed in the wind. Many people were lost in the Black Forest yearly. While many knew the woods were just naturally hazardous and full of beasts and hazards, many local folktales claimed the trees would occasionally come alive and snatch up wanderers. The girls clutched each other tightly and bravely walked through until they finally emerged from the shadowy woodlands and into the bright grove. My mother collected chestnuts while my aunt was more preoccupied with running around trying to instigate a game of hide-and-seek. Feeling a bit tight-strung from disobeying their parents, my mother was not in the mood to play. "Come play with me, Ada," my aunt squealed as she ducked behind a large, dark spruce tree at the grove's edge. "Will you come back here already, Amelia?" my mother yelled. "They'll be awake soon." My mother threw down her pail and huffed over, but her sister was gone. Her frustration turned to panic as she screamed her sister's name but received no response. She had vanished without a trace, leaving only behind her red scarf in the snow at the base of the massive spruce tree. My mother returned home to their parents, cheeks red and blistered, sobbing and clutching my aunt's red scarf. Her parents, relieved that one of their missing daughters had returned home, wiped the tears from my mother's eyes and asked her what had happened. Through her sobs, she could only choke out, "The trees ate her." My grandparents never found out what happened to their youngest daughter, but harbored a deep resentment towards their eldest until their deaths. This ordeal left my mother deeply scarred and with a lingering nervousness around trees. But this is my year, finally. My husband and I bought our first home, and I can now go full send on Christmas, tree and all. We picked out a handsome spruce and set it in the corner of our living room, and it felt like a real Christmas for once. That evening, I was shutting the lights off in the living room before bed. I unplugged the soft white lights wrapped around the tree. As I left the room, I heard a rustling behind me. I turned and found the tree had moved several feet from its original spot towards me. It hadn't fallen or tripped over. Instead, it stood straight up with a shower of fallen spruce needles trailing the floor behind it. I shimmied it back in place and went to leave the room again, but as I passed under the doorway, I heard a loud rustling again. I quickly flipped on the overhead light and spun around. but the tree remained in the same spot. My husband called me from the other room and asked what I was doing. I shook my head, cut off the light, and went to bed. Our dog, Francis, woke me the following morning with a soft whimper. He was shaking and had his tail tucked between his legs. It was unusual, but I figured he desperately needed to go for a walk. Upon hearing me say walk, he calmed down slightly, so I went into the living room to grab my walking shoes from the closet. I sat on the couch, slipped my shoes on, and called Francis so I could fasten his harness, but he refused to enter the living room. I found him cowering in my room, refusing to leave. I got frustrated, so I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him into the living room. He was fixed on the tree and softly growled and yipped. I got his harness on before realizing I had forgotten the bags, so I went to the kitchen for a moment to grab some. I was only gone for a moment, but from across the house, I heard a sharp yelp from Francis, like someone had stepped on his tail. When I returned to the living room, the dog was nowhere to be found. I searched the house high and low, but found nothing except his collar underneath a Christmas tree. I picked it up, rushed into our bedroom, and woke my husband. He insisted we search the neighborhood for Francis, but I knew it was useless. The tree did something to him. I insisted we toss it, but my husband insisted I was being hysterical. "Come on, tomorrow is Christmas," he said. "We'll keep it one more day and then get rid of it." I reluctantly agreed, but felt uneasy all day and never once turned my back on the tree. That night, I went to sleep with a pit in my stomach. I woke in the early hours of the morning to a piney smell. Panicked, I threw on the lights. The tree was hunched over my husband, and the soft smacking sounds of chewing echoed off the walls. The tree seemed startled and looked at me after I switched on the light. My husband's legs dangled out of the tree's mouth, a vast grinning maw with bright red lips and human-like teeth, having already been half consumed by the thing. It bit down, severing my husband's legs at the knee and sending a spray of blood down onto our off-white sheets. It licked its lips, and its grin widened as it slowly and quietly teeter-tarted over to me around the foot of the bed. I seized my moment, rolling over my husband's severed legs and landing on the wooden floor. I dashed but tripped on the carpet, sailed into the hallway, and slammed into the drywall. I was dazed for a moment, and the tree pounced on me. I could feel its cartoonishly huge teeth chewing on my leg and sucking me down into its gullet. Before it could eat me whole, I grabbed the topmost branch that stuck upwards and snapped it off. It softly whimpered and released me just long enough for me to wrest myself free and run into the living room. I rummaged through the closet and grabbed a massive can of bug spray and a lighter. The monster loomed behind me as I quickly ripped around, flicked on the light, and sprayed the Christmas tree with my homemade flamethrower. It erupted in flame, its sap crackling and shaking violently back and forth. I had accidentally set the drapes on fire, and the room quickly filled with smoke. I crawled to the door and tumbled out just as I ran out of breath. I slammed the door behind me for good measure. I sat on the front lawn and watched my house become engulfed in flames. The deaths of my husband and dog quickly overshadowed my gratitude for having survived the ordeal. I wept and cried out and cursed the trees. Through tears, I watched the trees rustling in the hazy distance beyond the fire, unsure if they were closer than I remembered before. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this narration. I just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my patrons who are subscribed over at my Patreon. We have a great big thank you from me to you, Alonzo, Kozak, Icy Narrates, Jesse Hartley, Andreas Anderson London, and Geek Sanctuary. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. If you would like to support too, just check out the links in my description. And thank you again for listening. I hope to see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.